I always believed the quiet of a Colorado winter night could steady my breathing, but at 11:47 p.m. in my parents' living room in Peyton, that stillness felt like a trap closing around me. The cold outside pressed against the windows while the warm air inside carried a tension thick enough to choke on. I had just come back from the ER, still wearing civilian clothes because I had been off duty for the weekend. My ribs ached each time I inhaled. My left wrist throbbed with every heartbeat. The doctor had looked at me with a question in his eyes, but I had looked away because I knew exactly what would happen if I said anything true. Now my father was standing across the room watching me with a smirk that twisted my stomach in a way the pain never could. My mother hovered near him silent, as always, her fingers tapping together as if she wished she could disappear into the wall. According to the story I had been pressured to repeat, I had slipped on the stairs and hit the edge of a table. The truth sat beneath my skin in purple and red patterns the ER lights had exposed. I tried to sit upright on the couch, but a sharp pull under my ribs made me wince. My father chuckled at the sound and shook his head. "She is dramatic. She bruised like a peach." His voice echoed in the room as if he owned every breath taken inside it. I opened my mouth to respond, but another knock sounded at the door. It was firm and controlled, the kind of knock that belonged to someone trained to announce presence without inviting argument. My father frowned and walked to the doorway, muttering under his breath about late-night interruptions. When he opened the door, Captain Jonah Reeves stood under the porch light wearing a heavy jacket and a look that told me this was not a social visit. He had been my reporting officer for 4 years, and he rarely looked rattled, but tonight his eyes were tracking every detail of my posture. "Captain Lockwood, I need to check on you." "We received an incident notice from the ER. My father barked out a laugh before I could answer. "She is fine. You Army kids think you own the world." Reeves stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, and his face changed the moment he saw my wrist. His eyes narrowed, his voice dropped. "Avery, what happened?" My father answered before I could form a word. "She belongs to this family, not the Army." In that moment, a wave of heat climbed my spine. I felt myself shrink the way I had at 16 and 21, and even last year when I came home in uniform and he had looked right through me. I tried to steady my breathing, but it caught again under the bruise. Reeves took a slow step toward me. His voice was no longer a question. "These marks do not match the report. I need to know who was here when you fell." My father moved between us, puffing himself up like he could block out the entire United States Army with his shoulders. "You are not questioning her in my house. She is not your concern." Reeves held his ground. "Captain Avery Lockwood is an active duty officer. Any suspected assault against her becomes federal by default." My father's smile widened. He enjoyed the word assault far too much. He leaned closer to Reeves. "You will not come into my home and tell me how to handle my child." My mother flinched at the word child because we all knew I had not been a child for a very long time. My ribs ached again. My wrist pulsed, and under it all, a quiet dread settled in. Reeves tapped the radio on his belt with 2 fingers. It was subtle, but my father's eyes caught it. He scoffed as if the gesture meant nothing. "She belongs to this family, not to you people." Before Reeves could respond, a low, heavy sound vibrated the walls. Tires on gravel, engines idling, doors opening. My father frowned and turned toward the window. A second later, the heavy knock on the door rattled the frame. Reeves stepped aside just as the door opened, and 2 military police officers entered with calm precision. Their flashlights swept the room. Their voices were steady. "We received a priority alert regarding possible harm involving a federal service member. Please step back, sir." My father let out another laugh, but it broke halfway like the first crack in a frozen lake. He started to speak, but the bright beam from a flashlight crossed my wrist, exposing the discoloration in full. My mother gasped. Reeves' eyes hardened. One of the MPs turned slightly and spoke into his radio. "Injuries visible. Proceeding with separation protocol." My father took a step toward me, but the MP lifted a hand. "Sir, do not interfere." The energy in the room shifted. For the first time in my life, my father did not look certain. He looked very small in a room he had always dominated. I stood as slowly as my ribs allowed, and the MP positioned himself between me and my father. The cold from outside swept in through the doorway as more boots approached the house. For the first time, I let someone else shield me, and for the first time, I let myself breathe. 48 hours earlier, the world felt quieter, but not kinder. I had been sitting in a windowless briefing room on Fort Carson, surrounded by the familiar hum of projectors and the shuffle of uniforms as our battalion staff reviewed the updated deployment rotation. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and cold paperwork. I kept adjusting the sleeve of my jacket because the fabric pressed against the same spot on my ribs that would bruise later. The colonel spoke about readiness cycles and logistics deadlines, but my mind drifted in and out the way it sometimes did after long missions. The kind of exhaustion that settled behind the eyes rather than in the muscles. When the briefing ended, I stepped outside into the thin Colorado winter air. The mountains near Colorado Springs stretched across the horizon sharp and unmoving. I used to love that view. Today, it felt like a reminder of how small and tired I had become. I walked toward the parking lot, listening to the crunch of gravel under my boots when my phone buzzed inside my pocket. The screen showed my mother's number. I hesitated. She never called during the day unless something was wrong, but the last time I had picked up, she had spent 20 minutes reminding me that my cousin Emily had already given the family 2 grandchildren. I answered anyway. "Hi, Mom." Her voice came soft and nervous. "Avery, can you come home this weekend? We need to talk as a family." That sentence landed in my stomach like a cold stone. My family never wanted to talk unless they needed something. And whenever they said we need to talk, it meant I was about to be reminded of how I had failed them without even knowing I had failed. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the cold air wash over my face. "I have duty cycles, Mom. What is this about?" She hesitated for too long. "Your father thinks you should be here." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Whenever she said your father thinks, it meant she was already afraid. I checked my watch. It was Wednesday afternoon. If I left after my shift Friday, I could reach Peyton before nightfall, but the idea of stepping into that house again made my shoulders tense. I tried the reasonable approach. "Mom, maybe we can talk over the phone." Silence. Then, in a smaller voice, she added, "Please, Avery. He will be angry if you do not come." The line stayed open after she said it, but she did not take it back. She did not soften it. She did not pretend it was her request. I rubbed my temple and swallowed the irritation rising in my throat. "All right, I will come." I ended the call before she could sound relieved, because hearing her relief always made me feel like I had failed another invisible test. I leaned against my car for a moment, staring across the lot. Soldiers walked in and out of buildings. Some laughed. Some hurried to their next briefing. All of them looked like they belonged. I had worn this uniform for nearly a decade, yet I could still feel like a stranger in my own skin every time I thought about going home. I drove back to my quarters and sat on the edge of the bed, replaying the call in my head. There had been something else in my mother's tone. Not urgency. Not fear. Something like warning, but too soft to recognize. I sighed and dropped my face into my hands. At 31, I was a decorated officer responsible for logistics decisions that affected hundreds of people. I could coordinate convoy movements in foreign terrain and make judgment calls under fire, but the idea of spending a weekend with my parents still made my throat tighten. Back home, I was not Captain Avery Lockwood. I was the daughter who did not smile enough. The daughter who did not choose a real career. The daughter who did not marry or give her father someone new to control. My rank meant nothing there. My achievements did not exist. My father's voice always found a way to flatten every part of me. I tried to distract myself by preparing gear for the next rotation, but my hands kept shaking. I wondered if I should call Reeves. He had always sensed when something was wrong, but I did not want to explain what I did not fully understand myself. When Friday arrived, I changed into civilian clothes and started the drive north toward Peyton. The highway stretched long and quiet through open fields dusted with snow. The sun sat low, casting long shadows across the road. With each mile, my stomach tightened. I passed the small gas station outside Falcon, where my father once lectured me for spilling a drink at 8 years old. I passed the church where my mother used to tell me to smile more, because quiet girls made people uncomfortable. By the time I turned onto the road that led to my parents' house, every muscle in my neck felt tight. The porch light glowed through the dusk, and for a moment I wished I could keep driving until the mountains swallowed me. But I parked the car and stepped out because duty, even the unwanted kind, had been stitched into me since childhood. My father opened the door before I knocked. His eyes traveled over my plain clothes and the exhaustion on my face. "You look worn out. Maybe the army is too much for you." He said it with a smile that never reached his eyes. My mother stood behind him, wringing her hands. Something in their posture made the small hairs on my arms rise. I stepped inside anyway because patterns are powerful, and mine had always been obedience first, survival second. I did not know then that within 2 nights the entire United States Army Police would stand in this same doorway. I only knew that my ribs were tight with dread long before pain ever touched them. The moment I stepped farther into the house, I felt the familiar heaviness settle on my shoulders, the same invisible weight that had pressed on me since childhood. My father, Frank Lockwood, stood in the center of the living room like a man guarding territory he believed he owned. At 62, he had the same broad stance he used when I was small, the same fixed stare meant to remind everyone that nothing happened in this house without his permission. His hair had thinned and his frame had softened with age, yet the authority in his voice remained sharp enough to cut. He shut the door behind me with a slow, deliberate motion, and for a moment the sound echoed just like it had when I was 12 and he had slammed it after deciding I needed to learn respect. My mother, Linda, hovered near the hallway with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her posture was not defensive but resigned, the kind of stance a person takes after decades of learning how to stay small. She offered a faint smile, but it flickered when she glanced at my father as if checking whether her expression would upset him. That small gesture always told me everything about the state of their marriage. I placed my bag near the wall and tried to breathe evenly, but the air inside the house carried that old electric tension that lived in the floorboards and the walls. I had felt it as a child when I tried to tiptoe around the house, hoping I would not draw his attention. I felt it as a teenager when I learned that any disagreement, even the simple act of saying no, could shift the temperature in the room. Now, at 31, with medals in my closet and soldiers who trusted my judgment, my body still reacted like it had back then, shrinking internally and waiting for impact. My father motioned toward the kitchen. "We are talking tonight. Sit." The command landed with the same force it always had. I followed him because arguing with Frank Lockwood had never resulted in anything except bruises or long, silent punishments. The kitchen smelled of reheated stew and old coffee, but the chairs were arranged like a tribunal with his seat at the head of the table. When I sat down, he studied me with a long, deliberate scan. "You do not visit anymore. Your mother worries." The accusation hid beneath fake concern. My mother lowered her eyes at the mention of her name. I answered carefully, "I have been busy with rotations." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Busy avoiding your family. Busy pretending you are too important to come home." The words slid under my skin like they always had. My mother touched her necklace nervously. "Frank, please. She is tired." He turned toward her with a glare that froze her mid-sentence. She retreated instantly, staring at the table. My father returned his eyes to me. "When are you getting promoted again? Or did they finally realize you are not leadership material?" His tone held a mocking sweetness that made my jaw tighten. My father had always twisted my achievements into insults. When I graduated officer school, he had said anyone could get lucky. When I earned my first command position, he told me it was probably paperwork, not real responsibility. When I deployed, he told me that smart women stayed home. My childhood had been a series of chores and orders mixed with reminders that I owed him everything and deserved nothing. When he was in a good mood, he called it discipline. When he was not, my mother would hand me an ice pack and whisper that I needed to learn not to provoke him. The bruises were always covered and the stories were always the same. I slipped. I fell. I tripped. It became a script I could recite without thinking. Sitting at the table now, I felt the old script tug at me even though I was far from that helpless girl. He leaned back in his chair. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than us, makes you strong." His eyes narrowed. "You forget who raised you. Who taught you how the world works? I could feel my pulse climbing, and I hated that he could still trigger that response. I am grateful for my upbringing, Dad. I kept my tone neutral. But the Army is my job, my responsibility. He slammed his palm lightly on the table, not enough to frighten the neighbors, but enough to send a jolt through me. Your responsibility is this family, this house, not whatever fantasy you are chasing in that uniform. My mother flinched at the sound, but she said nothing. She always said nothing. Her silence was a second shadow in my childhood, one that followed every injury and every lie I had been instructed to tell. I had once believed she stayed quiet to protect me, but with age, I understood she stayed quiet to protect herself. My father exhaled as if the discussion bored him. Anyway, we need some help with finances. Your mother told me you had extra pay saved from deployments. I felt the familiar unease spread through my stomach. I do not have anything available right now, Dad. His eyes darkened. So you can drive all the way from Colorado Springs to sit at this table, but you cannot help your parents. His tone grew colder. You are ungrateful, Avery. You always have been. I watched my mother's hands twist together. My father's gaze sharpened even more. You owe this family. Every word pried open old memories of nights spent holding bruised arms and mornings pretending nothing happened. I straightened slightly in my chair, ignoring the ache under my ribs. I am helping in the ways I can. His lips curled. That uniform filled your head with ideas. You think you are strong now. You think you can talk back. His voice dropped. You will always be the child who needed to be kept in line. Something inside me recoiled at the sentence, something old and bruised and tired. But beneath it, another feeling stirred, a small, quiet sense of refusal. The version of me who had survived deployments and led soldiers did not want to shrink again. Yet living under the same roof with the man who controlled every chapter of my early life made that strength feel fragile. My father stood and pushed his chair back. We will finish this later. He pointed to the hallway. Go lie down. You look pathetic. I walked to the guest room without arguing because I had learned long ago that obedience was the safest language in this house. But as I lay on the stiff mattress staring at the ceiling, I felt a cold certainty settle through me. Whatever was coming next in this house would not end the way it used to. And for the first time, I wondered whether the Army, not my family, would be the one to decide my safety. The shift in my father's mood came early the next morning. I had barely stepped into the kitchen when I felt it settle over the room like a drop in temperature. He sat at the table with a stack of bills spread out in front of him and a scowl that deepened with each line he read. My mother stood near the stove stirring a pot of oatmeal even though she had not eaten breakfast in years. She kept glancing over her shoulder as if waiting for something to break. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to move quietly, but my father lifted his head the moment he heard the tap shut off. Avery, we need to finish our conversation. The tone was polite, in the way a storm cloud is pretty before it bursts. I braced myself. Dad, I told you yesterday I cannot help with money right now. His jaw flexed, a long, slow flex, the kind he used when he was deciding how angry he wanted to be. He pushed the bills aside. You have deployment pay sitting somewhere. We know how this works. I swallowed. My personal finances are not something I can discuss. I have responsibilities. To your unit, he snapped, not to your family. You left us out of everything once you put on that uniform. There was no way to answer without setting him off, so I kept my voice level. I will help when I can. That is all I can say. He stood up abruptly, and the chair legs scraped hard against the tile. My mother jumped even though his movement had not been directed at her. He stepped toward me with a tightness in his expression I remembered too well. You think you can refuse me because you are a captain now. You think that uniform makes you untouchable. I stepped back, but my heel brushed against the cabinet. My pulse kicked up. Dad, please calm down. I am not refusing. I am explaining. The last word had barely left my mouth when his expression hardened even more. He hated explanations almost as much as he hated boundaries. Do not tell me what I should calm down about. His voice rose with each syllable. I took another step back, but the room felt smaller than it had moments before. I tried again. Dad, I cannot give you money today. That is simply the truth. Something snapped behind his eyes. Not loud, not dramatic, just a shift in his posture that told me I had said the wrong thing. Before I could take another breath, he moved forward with a single rough shove meant to force me out of his way. The edge of the dining table hit my side with a shock of white-hot pain. The breath left my lungs before I even registered the sound I made. My wrist hit the corner as I fell, and a second surge of pain shot up my arm so sharp that spots burst across my vision. I landed on the floor, unable to inhale. For several seconds, everything narrowed to the painful tug beneath my ribs. My mother gasped. "Frank, stop," she whispered. He ignored her. He stared down at me with annoyance rather than concern. If you had listened, this would not have happened. I pushed myself up slowly, one hand pressed to my side, because each breath now felt shallow and wrong. Mom crouched next to me, eyes wide and frightened. "Honey, can you stand?" I nodded, though it hurt, and managed to get upright. My father shook his head in disgust. "Pathetic." I closed my eyes briefly, then exhaled through the pain. "I need to go to the ER." That statement caused my mother's face to drain of color. She looked quickly at my father. He stepped forward and lowered his voice to a tone that chilled me more than the shove had. "Do not you dare tell them what happened. I said it was a fall. You slipped, you hit the table. That is what you say." My mother nodded rapidly. "Yes, Avery, please just say that. Do not start trouble. Trouble." As if their fear of embarrassment mattered more than the fire pulsing under my ribs. I grabbed my coat and keys, but my father blocked the doorway for a moment. His voice tightened. "You understand me. You slipped. I slipped." The words tasted familiar the way an old lie does when you have spoken it too many times. He stepped aside. My mother followed me to the car, wringing her hands. She opened her mouth to say something, but whatever sympathy she had died when she looked back at the house. She whispered, "Be careful what you say," and closed the door. The drive to the ER in Colorado Springs felt twice as long as usual. Each bump in the road made my ribs throb. When I stepped into UC Health Memorial, the fluorescent lights seemed too bright. The intake nurse asked what happened. I repeated the line. I slipped on the stairs. I fell against a table. Her eyes moved from my wrist to my side, then back to my face. The silence told me she did not believe a single word. A doctor examined me next. He lifted my arm gently, and I could not hide the wince. He pressed the bruised area along my ribs, and I sucked in a breath. He stepped back slowly, studying the pattern of discoloration. "These look like injuries from a fall on one side, but there is rotational bruising on your wrist. That is not typical of catching yourself during a fall." I looked away. I must have twisted. He paused as if debating whether to push further. "You are active duty correct." "Yes." He nodded. "I am required to file a report regardless." He did not say the words, but I heard them anyway. "The system will see this." When he left the room, I sat on the edge of the exam bed, holding my wrist lightly. Memories flickered in the cold corners of my mind. Ice packs in the freezer. My mother's trembling apologies. My father's voice-ordering silence. I buried those memories quickly because surviving meant closing doors, not opening them. After they wrapped my wrist and gave me instructions for my ribs, I stepped outside into the night air. My phone buzzed before I reached the parking lot. It was an automated internal alert from the Department of Defense Medical Tracking System. Injury report logged. Pattern flagged as possible domestic incident. Notification sent to commanding officer. My stomach sank. That meant Reeves would see it. I leaned against my car, letting the cold wind sting my eyes. Part of me wanted to hope he would ignore it. Another part of me knew he would not. Reeves had always been the kind of officer who noticed details others missed, and the system did not flag accidental bruises lightly. Somewhere across base, his screen was lighting up with my name, beside a category no soldier wanted attached to them. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, feeling the weight of two impossible truths. I was hurt, and someone outside my family finally knew. The moment the military police stepped through the doorway, the air inside the house seemed to split in half. One side held the familiar heaviness of my father's authority, the old gravitational pull that had shaped every year of my childhood. The other side held the disciplined calm of trained soldiers who did not hesitate when faced with conflict. For the first time in my life, something stronger than my father's will stood in the same room, and it did not flinch. The MP closest to me adjusted his stance and spoke firmly. "Captain Lockwood, please step away from the individuals in the room." His voice was neither loud nor aggressive. It was procedural, steady, and absolute. My father reacted instantly. He stepped forward with an indignation so loud it nearly drowned his words. "Get out of my house. You have no right to be here." The MP did not blink. "Sir, step back." My father's face turned a deeper shade as he jabbed a finger toward the soldier's chest. "I said get out. This is a private residence. You have no authority here." Reeves stepped between them, and the shift in his tone was immediate. Gone was the concerned friend. What emerged was the officer, the one who had briefed brigades and commanded younger soldiers with nothing more than his voice. "Sir, he said this is now a federal investigation. You need to remain where you are." The sentence dropped into the room with the weight of law. My father froze as if the words had hit something raw inside him. He looked at Reeves with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "This is ridiculous!" She slipped. "She is dramatic. She always has been." The MP beside me signaled gently for me to move behind him. I obeyed, though my legs trembled. My mother's hands fluttered near her mouth, but she remained silent, her eyes darting between my father and the uniforms blocking his path. Another MP stepped forward, taking notes. Visible injuries. Prior ER visit. Civilian witnesses pending. My father scoffed loudly. "Witnesses? You think anyone saw anything? This is family business." Reeves turned toward him, and his voice hardened further. "Sir, an active duty officer reported injuries inconsistent with the explanation provided. Under federal statute, her safety is not negotiable." My father laughed a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You have been poisoning her head since the day she enlisted. You Army people always think you own everything you touch." Reeves did not move. "Sir, step back and lower your voice." The MPs began sweeping the room methodically, their flashlights crossing corners, door frames, pathways I had walked since childhood. They were not searching for threats. They were assessing the environment the same way they would secure a scene in a housing unit on base. My father watched them with a sneer. "Look at this, an entire military parade because she lies about falling." He turned on me, eyes narrowed. "Tell them, Avery. Tell them you fell." My throat tightened and my heart hammered so loudly I wondered if everyone could hear it. The MP nearest to me said quietly, "Captain, you are safe to speak freely." My father stepped toward me, but two MPs moved instantly, blocking his path. Their boots hit the floor with synchronized precision. "Sir, do not approach the officer." My father's voice cracked into a shout. "She is my daughter! I will speak to her." Reeves raised his chin. "Not while she is under federal protection." The phrase federal protection hung in the space between us like a verdict. My father turned redder by the second. "You cannot take her. She lives here." Reeves answered calmly. "She lives where she chooses, and right now she is choosing to stand under Army jurisdiction until we determine the facts of this incident." My father sputtered. "Incident? There was no incident. You are blowing a meaningless bruise into a crisis." He swung toward my mother. "Linda, tell them she is dramatic." My mother's lips trembled, but no sound came out. She looked at me, not him, and for the first time I saw recognition in her expression. Recognition of the pain she had ignored for years, because ignoring it kept the peace. Reeves continued. "An ER doctor filed a suspected assault notation. The DOD flagged the injury pattern. I received the alert." He turned slightly toward me. "I arrived because I take those alerts seriously." His voice softened briefly before returning to command mode. "Sir, stand down." My father raised his arms dramatically. "Or what? You will arrest me?" The lead MP answered without hesitation. "If necessary." My father barked a laugh, but the sound wavered. "Arrest me. In my own home. For what?" The MP answered steadily. "Interference with a federal investigation. Obstruction. Potential endangerment of an active duty officer." My father stepped back as if struck. He looked at the uniforms blocking the entryway, the tactical lights, the quiet, purposeful presence that refused to bend to him. He had spent his entire life being the loudest voice in the room. Now his voice meant nothing. One MP spoke into his radio. Subject remains combative but contained. Officer separated. Begin secondary assessment. Another stepped closer to me. Captain, we need to document your injuries. Are you able to walk? I nodded, though my ribs protested. Reeves watched me step forward. Stay with the MPs, he said. I will handle him. I looked at my father then. Really looked at him. The man who had shaped my fear. The man whose anger had taught me to make myself small. Tonight he did not look powerful. He looked cornered, outranked, exposed. He pointed at me with a trembling hand. You think you are strong because they are here, but when they leave, you will come back to reality. Reeves answered for me. Reality is exactly why we are here, sir. He nodded at the MPs. Move her outside. As they guided me toward the doorway, my mother whispered my name, but I did not stop. I stepped outside into the cold night air, feeling something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to relief. Behind me, my father shouted one final time, This is not over. But for the first time in my life, I knew he was wrong. The cold outside hit harder than I expected, and for a moment, my breath caught from both the air and the ache beneath my ribs. The MPs guided me toward the patrol vehicle parked near the curb, lights flashing in slow pulses that cast long shadows across the snow. My father's voice still echoed faintly from inside the house, but the distance already felt like a wall rising between us. One of the MPs opened the back passenger door, then paused. Captain, would you prefer to sit in the front? You are not being detained. His tone was respectful. Steady, the opposite of everything I had grown up with. I nodded and slid into the front seat. Reeves approached a moment later, pulling the door open and crouching slightly so he could see my face clearly. Avery, take a slow breath. You are safe right now. Tell me what hurts. The words safe and hurt tangled somewhere in my throat, and for several seconds I could not speak. I stared ahead at the quiet street lined with dark houses and frozen driveways. This town had always looked peaceful from the outside, but tonight I saw it for what it was, the perfect place for secrets to stay buried. Reeves rested his hands on his knees, waiting, not pushing, only waiting. That patience cracked something inside me. My voice came out small. My ribs, my wrist. And then, unexpectedly, my eyes began to sting. One tear slipped down my cheek before I could wipe it away. Reeves inhaled slowly. How long has this been happening, Avery? I shook my head, unable to find an answer. He lowered his voice further. I have known you for years. You have never shown up injured without reason. You have never lied to me. So please tell me the truth, because your safety depends on it. The phrase lied felt heavier than the others. I pressed my fingers to my temples and breathed in through my nose the way they had taught us when panic threatened to take hold. I tried to speak once, but no words formed. Finally, with a shaky exhale, I whispered, Since I was little. Reeves blinked as if the meaning needed a second to settle. Little as in childhood. I nodded. He kept his voice controlled, but I heard something break beneath the surface. Avery. How long? How old were you? 10. Maybe earlier. I do not remember when it started. I just remember learning how to fall quietly. He shut his eyes for a moment, then reopened them with a steady focus. And your mother. Did she know? My throat tightened again. She knew enough. She told me to be careful not to upset him. Reeves shook his head slowly, disbelief tightening his features. All these years. You served overseas. You faced everything the Army threw at you, but this you carried alone. I looked down at my wrist where the discoloration had grown darker. I never wanted anyone to know. I never wanted to be a problem. The MP on the driver's side leaned slightly into view. Sir, we should begin documenting injuries. Reeves nodded. Do it carefully. She is hurt. The MP stepped around to my side, opening the door wider. Captain Lockwood, I am going to take photographs for the report. These will be secured in the restricted system. Only investigative personnel will see them." I nodded again, though embarrassment burned at the back of my neck. I pulled my sleeve up slowly, revealing the full bruise circling my wrist. The MP lifted a small camera. The click of each shutter felt like a weight dropping into a well deep and echoing. Then he photographed the bruising along my ribs after I carefully lifted the side of my shirt, the cold air biting at already tender skin. He kept his tone clinical. Rotational bruising, contusions at different stages, possible compression impact. Reeves heard those words and something shifted in his expression, a tightening of his jaw, a flicker of anger buried beneath professionalism. He turned toward me. "Avery, look at me." I forced my eyes up. "This pattern is not from a fall. We both know that." I nodded again because the last barriers inside me were already cracking. My voice broke as I whispered. He pushed me. I hit the table. He stared at me for a long moment as if he needed to anchor himself in his own breathing before speaking. "And before this week. Did he ever?" He paused, searching for a word that would not wound but still name the truth. "Hurt you?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, many times." His silence after that was not empty. It was heavy, controlled, dangerous in its restraint. The kind of silence a leader uses when rage must be contained because the situation demands clarity. Finally, he spoke. "Avery, this is abuse. It has been abuse for years. You know that." I wiped my face roughly with the back of my hand. "I do know. I just never said it out loud." The MP finished documenting the injuries, then stepped back respectfully. "Captain, that is all for now." Reeves exhaled slowly, then placed a steady hand on the open door frame, grounding himself. "You deserved safety long before tonight. Do you understand that?" I shook my head because understanding and believing were two very different things. He continued, "What happened in that house is not your shame, but it is your father's responsibility, and now it is ours to address." Hearing the Army claim responsibility for my safety broke whatever was left of the walls inside me. I pressed my hand against my ribs again and took a trembling breath. For the first time, the truth did not feel like betrayal. It felt like release. The ride back to Fort Carson felt surreal, as if the air inside the MP vehicle held a different gravity than the world I had just left. The cold night followed us through every mile, but for the first time, that cold did not feel threatening. It felt clarifying. The MPs spoke quietly over the radio, updating status codes and confirming our arrival window, while Reeves sat beside me in the front seat, his posture rigid with controlled tension. He kept glancing over to make sure I was breathing steadily. By the time we passed through the main gate, the familiar sight of the installation lights made something inside me settle into place. I had spent years believing I had two worlds, family and army, and that one did not bleed into the other. Tonight they collided, and the Army refused to let me fall. The MPs guided me toward the Security Operations Building, a place usually filled with routine reports, lost ID card filings, and administrative cases. Tonight, the atmosphere shifted the moment I walked through the doors. The sergeant on duty stood straighter. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Reeves spoke before anyone could ask questions. "Injury report flagged by DOD. Active duty officer involved. Potential domestic incident. We need a secure interview room." The sergeant nodded without hesitation and keyed open a restricted hallway. I followed Reeves into a small but well-lit room with reinforced walls and a heavy door. The table was metal, the chairs plain, the air faintly cool from an overactive vent. I had been in rooms like this to brief soldiers before investigations, but sitting here as the subject rather than the officer made the floor tilt under my feet. Reeves sat across from me. MPs remained outside the door. A moment later, a CID agent entered, his badge clipped neatly to his belt. He introduced himself with a calm professionalism that felt both reassuring and unnerving. "Captain Lockwood, I am Special Agent Hill with Army CID. I will begin the initial intake. You are not under investigation. You are the reporting party and the potential victim." He waited for me to nod before continuing. "First, I need to confirm your injuries were documented." Reeves answered before I could. "Photographs taken on scene, visible rib contusion, wrist injury, prior ER report, pattern flagged by system." Hill turned to me. Captain, do you consent to a secondary medical exam on post? I hesitated, then nodded. Yes. He began typing. As he worked, the keys clacked steadily, filling the quiet. He continued, Do you feel safe at your current residence? The laugh that almost escaped me was bitter. I do not live there. That is my childhood home. He glanced up. Are you returning there tonight? No, absolutely not. Good. Because you will not be permitted to. He made another note. Then he leaned forward slightly. Captain, I need you to understand something clearly. When a civilian harms an active duty service member, the Army treats it as a federal matter. Your father is now classified as a potential danger to a federal officer. The words hit harder than his tone. A classification like that was not symbolic. It triggered protocol's restrictions alerts. It meant someone had looked at the information and decided my father was a threat on record, not just in memory. Reeves watched my face carefully. Avery, this classification is for your protection. It is not an accusation, it is a safeguard. Hill continued. Based on the ER findings and the documentation collected tonight, CID must initiate a formal investigation. This includes interviewing the civilian subject. My mouth went dry. Interviewing. Which meant confronting. Which meant he would know I had spoken. Hill seemed to read that thought instantly. Captain, you are not responsible for his actions. The Army will handle all contact with him. You will not speak to him directly. I nodded, but the fear still pressed against my ribs. He shifted to a more procedural tone. I am going to ask you a series of questions. Answer only what you are comfortable with. Has this individual harmed you in the past? My heartbeat thudded once heavy. Yes. How long? Years. Hill paused long enough to acknowledge the weight behind that single word. Then he typed again. Were there prior medical incidents related to these events? Many, but none documented. Because you did not report them. I shook my head. I could not. Hill did not judge the answer. Instead, he asked, Has this person ever prevented you from seeking help? Yes. Has he ever threatened you? Regularly. Reeves shifted slightly as if resisting the urge to respond. Hill entered everything with measured precision. When he finished the intake, he closed the laptop gently. Captain, based on your answers and the physical evidence, CID is escalating this to a high-priority case. Effective immediately, a military protective order will be recommended. This prohibits your father from contacting you directly or indirectly. Any attempt to approach you becomes a federal offense. The room grew quiet. I stared at the table, letting the reality sink into my bones. Protection, safety, words that had never belonged to my childhood, yet now appeared on official documents under my name. Hill stood. I will coordinate with the on-call medical staff for a full examination. Then we will finalize your statement. Before he left, he added, You are brave for being here. Many people never come forward. When the door closed, Reeves leaned back slightly, exhaling a breath he had been holding. Avery, look at me. I lifted my eyes to his. What he said is true. This is not your burden anymore. The Army has it now. The simplicity of that sentence made tears sting again. Not because it fixed everything, but because for the first time I was not carrying the truth alone. 2 hours later, after the medical exam and after Hill finalized the initial report, the formal classification updated in the system. Civilian subject Frank Lockwood flagged as potential danger to federal officer. Protective protocols activated. The weight of that designation did not feel vindictive. It felt justified, necessary, long overdue. I sat on the bench outside the exam room, wrapped in a blanket they had given me, and listened to the quiet hum of the building. For the first time since arriving at my parents' house, I let out a full, long breath without flinching from the pain. I was no longer the child who slipped. I was the officer the system was now protecting. The next morning, Fort Carson felt different, as if the installation itself had shifted its posture around me. Word traveled fast in military communities, not through gossip, but through protocols alerts and the quiet awareness that when one service member is in danger, the entire system moves to protect them. I walked into the operations building with Reeves at my side, my ribs still aching but my steps more grounded than they had been in days. A command-level briefing had been called to review deployment logistics, something normally routine. But my presence today carried an undercurrent of tension I could feel in the air. Officers I had worked with for years offered brief nods, not the polite kind, but the kind filled with recognition of what had happened. Respect wrapped in concern. In the conference room, screens flickered with maps and schedules while voices settled into structured discussion. For a moment, I felt almost steady, anchored by the familiarity of military order. Then, a commotion erupted outside the building. A voice shouted my name, the same sharp tone I had grown up bracing against. My stomach tightened instantly. Reeves reacted first, leaning toward the window. MPs outside moved quickly, their stances rigid. The voice rose again, demanding, not requesting, not pleading. Demanding. "Avery, get out here right now." I felt the blood drain from my face. Reeves turned toward the door. "Stay inside. Do not move." His tone left no room for argument. Officers in the room paused mid-sentence, glancing between one another as the noise outside escalated. Two senior majors stepped closer to the window. Colonel Harris frowned. "Is that a civilian yelling for one of my captains?" Another officer answered quietly. "That is her father, sir." The words hung in the room like static before a storm. Something inside me folded slightly, remembering too vividly the power that voice had always held. But another part of me straightened because for the first time that voice had no access to me, no reach, no authority here. Reeves stepped out of the conference room. The door closed behind him and the noise outside became muffled but still sharp enough that I recognized the pattern. The attempts to command, the attempts to intimidate, the disbelief that anyone would dare deny him access to what he believed he owned. Colonel Harris turned toward me. "Captain Lockwood, do you need to step out?" I shook my head quickly, though my heartbeat thudded against my ribs. "No, sir. I am fine." But my voice was thinner than usual, and several officers noticed. Major Patel spoke gently. "Captain, is that the individual flagged in the CID report?" I nodded. His expression hardened instantly. He exchanged a look with Harris. Through the window, I saw MPs confronting my father at the gate. He tried to push past them, but their formation tightened. One held a hand out blocking him. Another checked the military protective order on his tablet. My father shook with frustration the way he used to before slamming doors or throwing accusations. But here on federal property, his anger had nowhere to land. His voice cracked loudly enough that even through glass we heard pieces of his rant. "She is my daughter. She comes home with me. You cannot keep her. This is a free country." A female lieutenant colonel near the back of the room whispered under her breath. "My God," another officer murmured. He came to a military base to confront her. What was he thinking? Harris straightened his uniform coat. "Everyone return to your seats." He looked at me with an expression I had never seen directed at me before. Not pity, but protective indignation. "Captain Lockwood, you are not going anywhere near that gate. You stay in this building until MPs clear the situation." I nodded again, unable to speak, as warmth pricked behind my eyes. Sitting among officers who had served tours, led platoons, made life or death decisions every week. I felt my past collide with my present in a way that made my breath tremble. I had spent decades believing that no one would stand between me and my father, that his word would always drown mine, that fear was inevitable. Not here, not today. Outside, my father continued shouting, but the MPs did not react to his volume. Their professionalism only seemed to enrage him more. They gestured firmly toward the exit lane. He tried again. "She is lying. She is confused. This is all a misunderstanding." He jabbed a finger toward the building. "I need to speak to her." One MP shook his head. "Sir, you are in violation of a military protective order. Leave the premises immediately." I saw my father's face change, then a shift from rage to disbelief. Disbelief that the Army, a system he had mocked for years, would draw a line he could not cross. He stepped forward again, but this time 2 MPs moved in unison, cutting him off completely. "Sir, you will be escorted off base. Failure to comply will result in detainment." The word detainment seemed to jolt him. For the first time, he looked around and realized dozens of soldiers were watching. His authority shrank in real time. Eventually, he stepped back, shaking his head repeatedly, muttering under his breath before turning toward his truck. The MPs followed until he exited through the gate. Only when the last of the noise faded did the conference room exhale. Harris cleared his throat. "Everyone take a moment." Then he turned toward me again. "Captain Lockwood, whatever you dealt with out there, that is not following you in here. You have the full backing of this command." Several officers nodded silently. Another rested a supportive hand on the table near me. The impact of that simple gesture hit deeper than I expected. For the first time in my life, the world did not tilt toward him. It tilted toward me. I straightened in my chair, my ribs aching, but my breath finally steady. Reeves re-entered the room a minute later. He met my eyes. "He is gone." MPs escorted him out. "Are you all right?" I swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes. Really. Yes, this time." And as the meeting resumed and the officers around me returned to business, I felt something settle into place, something I had never experienced before. I was no longer alone in the fight, and for the first time, my voice had a shield stronger than fear. The medical wing of Fort Carson was quiet in the late afternoon, the sterile lighting humming softly as Reeves walked beside me toward the examination room reserved for follow-up assessments. My ribs still burned with each step. My wrist throbbed in a steady pulse, but the deeper ache came from knowing that this was the first time in my life the injuries on my body would be recorded truthfully. No rewritten story, no forced apology, no whispered excuses. A senior Army physician stepped into the room moments after we arrived. His expression shifted the second he saw the preliminary report in my file. "Captain Lockwood, I am Dr. Myers. I have reviewed the ER notes and the initial photographs taken by MPs. We will conduct a full assessment today." He spoke gently but directly, the voice of someone accustomed to treating soldiers who carried damage both visible and hidden. I sat on the exam table while he adjusted the overhead light. Reeves remained against the wall, arms crossed, present, but unobtrusive, as if he understood his presence mattered simply because he would not let me go through this alone. Dr. Myers began by examining my ribs. He pressed lightly along the bruised area, and I winced despite trying to hold steady. He murmured quietly, "Deep tissue discoloration, multi-layered bruising. Pattern appears consistent with compression impact against a hard edge." He stepped back briefly, making notes. Then he gestured toward my wrist. I extended my arm slowly. Under the harsh white light, the bruise looked worse than it had in the photos. Dark purple arcs wrapped around my wrist with yellow edges where older marks had begun to fade. Myers lifted my hand, gently rotating it with clinical care. His brow furrowed. "Captain, this is rotational bruising, not consistent with bracing during a fall. The grip pattern suggests forceful pulling." He marked it down. Then his eyes moved to the faint marks near my elbow. He pointed. "Are these older injuries?" My breath hitched. I hesitated but nodded. "Yes, sir. They are from previous incidents." He looked at me carefully, then continued the exam with deliberate thoroughness. He documented every bruise on my shoulder, every tenderness along my arm, every small discoloration that still lingered from months prior. When he finished, he stepped back and exhaled. "Captain, I need to be clear. The injuries you presented with do not align with your initial explanation of a fall. They align with inflicted harm." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "I know." He nodded once firmly, as if acknowledging the courage it took to say those two words. When the exam was complete, he pulled a rolling stool beside the table. "I am submitting my findings to CID. It will be classified but accessible to investigative personnel." He paused, then his voice softened. "I am sorry this happened to you. You deserved intervention long before now." He stood and left the room to file the report. Reeves approached slowly after the door closed. "Avery, are you holding up?" I swallowed and nodded, though a wave of exhaustion washed over me. "I think so, but the truth is hitting harder than I expected." Before he could respond, someone knocked on the door. Special Agent Hill entered with a tablet in hand. "Captain Lockwood, we have reviewed the medical documentation. The physician's findings support the initial alert. Based on the layerings of injuries, bruise patterns, and your statement, CID is classifying the incident under long-term coercive harm. He spoke clearly without embellishment, yet the words landed like a verdict years in the making. He tapped the tablet to bring up a summary. The pattern of injuries is consistent with repeated episodes of physical force. Evidence suggests long-term coercive control. He looked directly at me. Avery, this is not a one-time incident. This is a documented history of harm. For a moment, the room felt too small. My lungs pulled in air, but it did not seem to reach the bottom. Reeves stepped closer, but did not touch me, simply grounded the space with his presence. Hill continued. Based on this classification, we are escalating the civilian subject, Frank Lockwood, to high-risk status. Effective immediately, he is flagged as potential danger to federal officer. Additional restrictions are being implemented. He paused, then added something rarely spoken aloud in these rooms. The extent of injury layering suggests chronic exposure. You survived years of this. The steadiness of his tone contrasted with the storm inside me. Hearing professionals name the thing I had lived broke something open, but not in the way I expected. It did not shatter me. It released me. For the first time, the truth existed outside my head. It lived in files, reports, photographs. The Army had given the truth form. Evidence. Hill made several final notes before looking at me again. Captain, this will move forward regardless of whether you pursue civilian charges. The Army has jurisdiction to protect its members. Reeves added. Avery, this is not your burden anymore. You are not fighting this alone. I felt tears rise but refused to look away. My voice came out quiet but steady. I grew up thinking pain was normal. I grew up thinking I deserved it. Hill's expression softened with something like solemn respect. You did not deserve any of it. The report reflects that. He stood. We will notify you when the next steps are scheduled. After he left the room, silence settled again. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of my parents' house, but a different kind. One filled with the awareness that something irreversible had been set into motion. Reeves finally spoke. How are you feeling? I considered the question carefully. Then, with a trembling breath, I answered honestly, like I am seeing my life clearly for the first time. He nodded. Good. That clarity is the beginning, not the end. I touched the bandage on my rib and looked around the room, illuminated in the stark, bright light of truth. The bruise patterns were no longer secrets. They were evidence. The years of coercion were no longer memories. They were documented history. And the man who had shaped my fear was no longer untouchable. CID had given my past a name, and naming it meant it no longer owned me. The power shift began quietly, not with MPs or CID or formal reports, but with the sound of my phone vibrating across the metal table in the secure room. I had just finished signing the final portion of the medical documentation when the screen lit up with a number I knew too well. For a moment, I simply stared at it, feeling the old instinct clawing up my spine. The instinct that said, answer. Now do not make it worse. Reeves noticed immediately. His voice lowered. You do not have to pick that up. I swallowed hard. If I do not, he will show up somewhere again. Reeves considered that for half a second, then gave a short nod but moved closer, his presence steady like a barrier. Answer on speaker. Let him say who he really is. My hand trembled as I accepted the call. Before I could speak, my father's voice exploded through the room so loud the MPs in the hallway turned their heads. So this is what you are doing now, hiding behind your uniform like a coward. I flinched instinctively the way every cell in my body had learned to react over decades. Reeves's eyes sharpened. He reached over and pressed the speaker button himself, then tapped a subtle signal to the MP outside the door. Begin recording. My father kept going, his breath ragged with accusation. You think calling your army friends makes you powerful. You think they scare me. Let me tell you something, girl. That uniform will not protect you from the truth. You belong to this family, and you will answer for what you have done. My stomach twisted. Every word was familiar. Every cadence a script I had grown up memorizing. He paced as he yelled. I could hear the gravel crunching under his feet, or perhaps he was stomping across the driveway. I imagined the tightness in his face, the way he jabbed his finger at the air when anger overtook reason. Do you hear me, Avery? You are not safe just because you put on some costume and pretend to be someone important. You come home and fix this, or I swear you will regret ever dragging your lies into a military base." Reeves stepped forward, placing one hand flat on the table as if grounding the moment. His voice dropped into a low command. "Keep him talking." My pulse hammered in my neck. "Dad, I am not coming home." There was a silence sharp enough to slice through the room, then a growl so deep it almost masked the words. "You will do what I say. You always have." That sentence hit harder than the shove into the table because it exposed the truth he believed. Ownership, control, entitlement, all wrapped inside the word family. Reeves nodded at me again. My voice shook, but I answered firmly. "No, I will not." Something slammed on the other end, maybe his hand against the truck door, maybe the steering wheel, maybe anything he could strike that was not me. "So this is how you repay me. After everything I have done for you, after feeding you, clothing you, raising you, you run to your army handlers and cry abuse like a child seeking attention." His voice twisted into a sneer. "You think anyone will believe you. You think they will take your side over mine." Reeves's expression shifted, and for a moment I saw not the officer, but the man who had watched soldiers survive and break and rise again. His jaw flexed, but he kept steady. My father continued spewing venom. "I should have straightened you out years ago. I should have taught you consequences. You are weak, Avery, weak like your mother. You hide behind rules and uniforms because without them, you are nothing." Something inside me snapped at that, not from fear, but from clarity. I spoke slowly, controlling each syllable. "Dad, you hurt me. You have been hurting me for years." For the first time in 30 years, the line went silent. Not because he felt remorse, but because he could not believe I said it aloud. When he finally answered, his voice held a razor edge. "If you repeat those lies again, you will wish you never put on that uniform." That was the moment Reeves nodded sharply to the MP by the door. The soldier stepped in, holding a portable recorder as backup evidence. "Recording confirmed," he said. Reeves leaned closer to the phone, his voice firm. "Sir, this is Captain Jonah Reeves, United States Army. You are currently being recorded under federal authority." The silence from the other end transformed instantly into panic. "You cannot record me. You have no right." Reeves maintained complete composure. "You have made multiple threats toward a federal officer. This call will be submitted to CID. Continued contact will result in charges." My father tried to backpedal, but the desperation in his voice only exposed him further. "I did not mean threats." She misunderstood. "We always talk like this. This is a family matter." Captain Reeves's response was ice cold. "It stopped being a family matter the moment you caused physical harm to a service member." My father's breathing turned ragged. He tried one last tactic, the one that had controlled me all my life. "Avery, listen to me. You come home now and we forget this happened." But something inside me settled. A quiet, unshakable truth. I am not coming home. His inhale was sharp, like someone bracing for a blow they did not expect. Then the line went dead. Reeves stared at the disconnected screen for a full second before speaking. "That is more than enough," he signaled to the MP. "Submit the recording. Flag it urgent." The MP left immediately. Reeves exhaled slowly, then looked at me. "Avery, that call changes everything. Not because he threatened you, but because he exposed who he has always been." I pressed my palm against the bandage on my ribs, breathing through the tremor in my chest. I had expected to feel fear, but instead, a strange, unfamiliar sensation swept over me. Power. The shift was real, documented, recorded. And this time, the consequences would not land on me. They would land on him. The escalation happened faster than even Reeves expected. Once the recorded call was submitted, CID moved with a precision that civilians rarely witness. Within hours, Special Agent Hill contacted local law enforcement to coordinate a controlled interview with my father. Because he had already violated the military protective order by appearing at the gate, and because his call contained veiled threats, CID classified him as high priority for immediate questioning. I sat in the small waiting room outside the CID suite, wrapped in a thin blanket, my breath slow and tight each time pain flared under my ribs. Reeves remained nearby, not hovering, but present a steady axis around which the chaos of the last 2 days revolved. Through the closed door, I could hear faint movements, muted voices, the hum of equipment. Then the hallway filled with deliberate footsteps. MPs escorted my father inside. He looked smaller than I expected, though rage curled around him like heat rolling off asphalt. His eyes darted around the room, and when they briefly landed on me, something tightened in his expression. Not guilt, but indignation that I dared sit here protected while he was escorted like a threat. The MPs guided him past me and into the interrogation room. The door closed with a heavy finality. Reeves glanced at me. "You do not have to listen to this." I swallowed. "I know, but I need to know what he says." Reeves hesitated, then nodded and turned on the observation audio. Through the one-way glass, I could see him sit rigid, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Hill entered carrying a tablet and a thin folder, his posture calm, almost clinical. "Mr. Lockwood, thank you for coming." My father scoffed. "I was dragged." Hill ignored the statement. "We will begin with basic questions." He confirmed my father's name, address, and birth date, each answered with curt irritation. Then Hill opened the folder. "Mr. Lockwood, we have visual documentation of injuries sustained by Captain Avery Lockwood. We also have an ER report showing patterns inconsistent with an accidental fall." My father leaned back, wearing a thin smirk. "She lies. Always has. It runs in her blood." Hill's expression did not change. "Are you claiming the injuries were self-inflicted?" My father rolled his eyes. "She is dramatic. That is all." Then Hill placed a still photograph on the table, the one of my wrist taken just hours earlier. He rotated it so my father could see the full discoloration, the grip-shaped bruising. "Mr. Lockwood, can you explain this pattern?" My father stared at the image for a long moment before his lips curled. "She needs discipline." The words entered the room like a blade, unexpected, raw, revealing. Hill's posture sharpened. "Discipline. What do you mean by that?" My father shrugged as if the meaning was obvious. "Kids these days think they can do anything. A little correction never hurt anyone." I felt my breath catch in my chest. Reeves turned sharply toward the glass but said nothing. Hill folded his hands calmly. "Mr. Lockwood, Captain Lockwood is 31 years old." My father scoffed again. "Age does not matter. Respect does. She has never had it. Always thought the Army made her better than us. Needed to be brought back down." I watched the realization bloom across Hill's face, not surprise, but confirmation. He leaned forward. "Brought back down. How exactly?" My father shifted in his seat, the bravado slipping into irritation. Words, tone, rules. She needed to know who was in charge. Hill opened the tablet. "Is this why you visited Fort Carson this morning in violation of a federal protective order?" My father bristled. "She was hiding. I had to bring her home." That word again, bring, wrapped in entitlement and ownership. Hill's tone remained neutral. "Were you attempting to remove her from federal custody?" My father did not answer, but the silence was louder than denial. Hill continued. "Did you or did you not push your daughter into a table on the night of her ER visit?" My father snapped upright. "She fell. She always falls. Clumsy girl. And if she had listened to me, she would not have gotten hurt." The shift was subtle, but devastating. He was defending the injury by blaming the victim. Hill pressed. "So you acknowledge the injury happened following a disagreement?" My father exhaled sharply through his nose. "Everything is a disagreement with her. Always thinks she knows better. Needed to be corrected. Correction. Discipline. Brought down." The patterns matched not only the bruises on my skin, but the vocabulary of a man convinced his control was righteous. Hill remained steady. "Mr. Lockwood, correction is not an excuse for physical harm." My father slammed a palm against the metal table. "I did not harm her. I disciplined her. There is a difference." That was the sentence that ended the interview in spirit, even before it ended in procedure. The moment he spoke those words, the air inside the observation room changed. Reeves straightened. The MP beside the glass stiffened. Even I felt my breath lock inside my rib cage. Hill calmly closed his folder. For the record, Mr. Lockwood, you have just admitted to intentional physical force against a federal officer and to sustained behavior consistent with coercive control. My father paled, then leaned forward aggressively. Do not twist my words. You people always twist things. She deserved to be corrected. That was the final nail. Hill stood. The interview has concluded. Mr. Lockwood, you will remain available for further questioning. MPs entered immediately, escorting him out of the room. As they passed the observation window, my father's eyes found me again. There was no remorse in them, only rage that he was no longer the one holding the narrative. When the hallway finally emptied, Reeves let out a long, slow breath. Avery, he just confessed to long-term coercive behavior. That is not just evidence. That is intent. I stared at the empty interrogation room, trying to reconcile the man inside those walls with the figure who had towered over my childhood. For years, I had believed he was unstoppable, unbreakable, unchallenged. Now I had witnessed the moment his power fractured, not because I fought him, but because the truth had been recorded, documented, stripped of secrecy. CID entered the observation room. Hill looked at me with a firmness that bordered on solemnity. Captain Lockwood, the investigation has reached decisive classification. The subject displays explicit statements indicating intent to exert control through force. The official wording will read pattern consistent with long-term coercive control and physical abuse. My breath trembled. Reeves rested a hand lightly on the back of my chair, grounding me without intruding. Hill continued, You did the right thing coming forward. This is not a gray area. This is a clear threat to your safety. For the first time, I let myself inhale without bracing for my father's reaction. Because for the first time, his reaction no longer controlled the outcome. The Army did, the truth did, and I was finally standing on the side of it. Linda arrived at Fort Carson just after sunset, escorted by a community liaison officer who had been sent to her home when CID notified local authorities of the escalating situation. I did not expect to see her. I certainly did not expect to see the expression she wore, a mix of fear, exhaustion, and something deeper, something like the crumbling edge of a dam that had held too much for too long. She stepped into the small family interview room, clutching her purse with both hands as if letting go might cause her to fall apart. When she saw me sitting at the table, she gasped softly, one hand rising to her mouth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room hummed with fluorescent light and unspoken truths that had waited decades for a place to land. Then her shoulders collapsed inward. Oh, Avery. Her voice broke on my name. She sank into the chair across from me and immediately began to cry. Not the quiet tears she shed behind closed bedroom doors, but a raw, shaking sob that came from years of silence. I had never seen her cry like this. Not for herself. Not for me. She reached out as if to touch my face, but stopped short, hovering, unsure if she had the right. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry. My throat tightened. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Then, with her hands trembling in her lap, she forced herself to continue. I knew. Her voice cracked. I knew he was hurting you. I knew since you were 10. I felt something inside me shift, like the floor had tilted. 10. I had known the truth, but hearing her say it out loud made the years slam into me all at once. She looked down at her hands as tears dripped onto her wedding ring. I should have stopped him. I should have protected you. But every time I tried to speak up, Her breath hitched. He would turn it on me. He would say it was my fault you were difficult, that I raised you wrong, that I made you disrespect him. I remembered those nights, the muffled arguments, my mother pleading, my father's voice rising sharp and punishing. It had taken me years to realize she had been trapped too, but understanding it did not erase the consequences. She wiped her cheeks, but the tears kept coming. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would keep him calm. If I said nothing, maybe he would stop. Maybe he would not get worse. She took a shaking breath. But he always got worse. Every year. Every time. My chest tightened painfully, not from injury, but from the grief of hearing the truth spoken in a room where he had no power to interrupt. Mom, why did you never leave? The question escaped before I could soften it. She squeezed her eyes shut. I was afraid. You know how he gets. I did not have my own money. I did not have anywhere to go. I thought staying was the safest thing I could do. For you. For me. I swallowed hard. And when I left for the Army, she let out a long, trembling exhale. I hoped you would be free of him. That distance would protect you. But every time you came home, she covered her mouth with both hands as another sob broke loose. He always found a way to pull you back under. Something inside me cracked, not anger, not blame, but a deep, aching sadness for the life she had been forced to survive. For the years we both lived in the same prison wearing different forms of silence. She looked up at me with desperate eyes. I should have told someone. I should have asked for help. I should have stopped him that night he pushed you. I froze. I always freeze. I don't know how to stand up to him. I never have. I reached across the table and took her shaking hand, gently mindful of my wrist. Mom, the Army knows now. It is not on you anymore. She let out a small whimper. Your father, they said he might be charged. And all I could think was thank God. Then she wept harder, as if the admission itself cracked open decades of guilt. Reeves stepped quietly into the doorway, then remained still, giving us privacy. My mother squeezed my hand tightly. Avery, I am sorry I did not protect you. I am so sorry for every time I asked you to lie, for every time I said you slipped, for every time I chose to survive instead of saving you. Her sobs filled the small room, and for the first time in my life, I saw her not as the silent shadow behind my father, but as another casualty of his violence. Mom, I whispered, you cannot change what happened, but you can let the truth be told now. She nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face. I will. I swear I will. And as she wept into her hands, something settled inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a release. A sigh in the deepest part of me that finally understood I had never been alone in the harm, and I was no longer alone in the truth. The morning after my mother's breakdown, something inside me shifted from survival to strategy. For the first time in my life, I was not reacting to him. I was preparing against him. That clarity came from a place I did not recognize at first, a place that felt steadier, sharper, almost cold. Reeves noticed it the moment I walked into the administrative wing at Fort Carson. You ready for this? He asked quietly. I nodded, more ready than I have ever been. He guided me into a conference room where a family advocacy program representative and a legal liaison officer were already waiting. The room was small, but structured the kind of space designed for decisions that change lives. As I sat the FAP representative, a woman in her 40s with calm eyes and a folder full of policy documents spoke first. Captain Lockwood, based on your disclosures and the documentation provided, we are initiating a full case file under the Family Advocacy Program. This will allow the Army to provide support services and legal protection. My father would have hated those words. Protection, support, intervention. All things he believed belonged only to him. She continued, because the threat comes from a civilian and because your safety is at direct risk, we are also recommending a military protective order effective immediately. Reeves leaned forward. That will keep him from contacting her coming near her home or appearing at the base gate. The liaison officer slid a form across the table. Captain, this document requires your signature. Once signed, it goes to the garrison commander for authorization. After that, it becomes enforceable under federal jurisdiction. My hands shook slightly as I picked up the pen not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant. For 31 years, my father's voice had been the law in our house. Now, my signature would override his authority with federal protection. I signed slowly, letting every stroke of ink carve a line between past and future. When I finished, the liaison nodded. Effective upon command approval. Mr. Frank Lockwood will be prohibited from calling you, visiting your residence, coming to this installation, or contacting you through third parties. Any violation can result in immediate federal charges. Something unknotted in my chest at those words. Air filled places in my lungs that had been tight for decades. Reeves watched me carefully. Avery, this is the start, not the end. You are taking control. The FAP representative added softly, and you are not doing it alone. When the meeting was over, Reeves walked me toward the housing office. "Where are we going?" I asked. He answered without hesitation. "To get you moved. You are not spending another night anywhere he can find you." His tone allowed no argument, so I did not give one. Instead, I followed him past the administrative buildings into the residential sector of Fort Carson. Rows of modest, clean base housing stretched under the Colorado sky. As we approached the office, a housing specialist greeted us with a clipboard. "Captain Lockwood, we received priority authorization for immediate relocation. You will be assigned a furnished apartment on the east side near other single officers. Move-in can begin today." I blinked, unsure how quickly everything was moving. "I do not have anything with me," Reeves answered instantly. "Then we will get it later. With MPs escorting, safety first." The specialist handed me a set of keys. "Unit 14B. You will have temporary bedding and essentials provided until your personal items are retrieved." For a moment, I stared at the keys lying in my palm. They looked ordinary, but they weighed like freedom. Reeves guided me to the apartment. It was simple one-bedroom, small kitchen windows that caught the morning light, clean pine scent rising from freshly mopped floors, but it felt like a world away from the house where pain had been normalized. When the door closed behind us, I exhaled a breath so deep I did not realize I had been holding it. Reeves watched me take in the space. "How does it feel?" I scanned the quiet room, the safety, the distance of the fact that there was no shouting, no footsteps, no dread waiting around a corner. "It feels unreal." He nodded. "It will feel real soon enough." After he left me to settle in, I stood alone in the living room listening to the silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of a life undiscovered. Later that afternoon, the MPO was officially approved. The liaison officer contacted me directly. "Captain Lockwood, the military protective order is now active. Enforcement procedures have been briefed to Gate Security CID and local law enforcement. Your father has been notified." I did not ask how he reacted. I could imagine it too easily, the outrage, the disbelief, the certainty that no one could tell him what to do. But they had, and he could not undo it. That night, Reeves returned with 2 MPs to retrieve my belongings from my parents' house. I stayed inside the vehicle parked across the street while they carried out boxes, but I saw my mother standing in the doorway, wringing her hands, eyes red swollen. I did not see my father, which meant he was either refusing to come out or being held back by something stronger than his ego. When my things were safely loaded, Reeves climbed into the driver's seat. No contact, he confirmed. He did not step out, did not shout, did not try to violate the MPO. He paused, then added quietly, "That is not restraint, Avery. That is fear." I looked down at the key to my new apartment and turned it in my fingers. "Not fear of me," I said. "Fear of consequences." Reeves glanced at me. "That is the shift. You are no longer the one absorbing the consequences. He is." When we returned to base housing and the door shut behind me again, I felt a sensation I barely recognized. Security. Not just physical, but something deeper. Something internal. My father no longer had access to my life, my space, my voice. For the first time, I realized the law was not abstract. It was a shield, and I was standing behind it instead of being crushed beneath the weight of a man who believed he owned me. I dressed for bed, slowly feeling the stiffness in my ribs, but also the steadiness growing in my chest. Tomorrow, the investigation would continue. Tomorrow, there would be reports and hearings and procedures. But tonight, I slept in a place where no one could shout me awake. And as I drifted off in the quiet of my new home, one truth settled firmly in my mind. I was no longer fighting to survive my father. I was building a life where he no longer existed as a threat. And that was the smartest rebellion I had ever made. The public justice moment arrived not with a dramatic confrontation or a courthouse speech, but with the quiet inevitability of truth traveling farther and faster than any lie my father had ever told. It began on a crisp Saturday morning when I received an email from the Family Advocacy Program notifying me that the quarterly Community Safety Review would be held at the Colorado Springs Town Hall. These meetings were routine for military-adjacent communities designed to share updates on domestic safety concerns, resource changes, and risk assessments affecting service members and civilians living within proximity to the base. Normally, names in reports were anonymized, but severe or repeated cases, specifically those deemed high risk, were sometimes disclosed for community safety. And my father, after everything, was now officially classified as a high-risk civilian aggressor with a federal-level protective order against him. When I arrived, the town hall was already filling with residents, soldiers, families, retirees from Peterson Space Force Base, and officials from local law enforcement. The room hummed with the low murmur of people greeting each other, shuffling papers, adjusting chairs. I found a seat near the back beside Reeves, who had insisted on attending even though it was technically off-duty for him. "Consider me moral support," he said, though the way his jaw tightened whenever my father's name came up told me he was here for more than encouragement. The meeting began with standard agenda items, safety initiatives, mental health outreach updates from Army Community Service. Then the FAP director stepped to the podium holding a folder stamped with the county seal. Next agenda item is the domestic safety notification. We have one case of elevated concern that meets the criteria for public disclosure due to significant risk factors and repeated patterns of aggression. Reeves glanced at me, then back at the podium. My pulse flickered. The director flipped open the folder and read in a steady, professional tone. The subject is identified as Frank Lockwood, age 62, resident of Peyton, Colorado. He is currently under a military protective order for posing a verified threat to an active-duty Army officer. There was a shift in the room. Chairs creaked. Murmurs started low, then grew into soft, incredulous whispers. I felt the air around me thicken as if everyone was turning to look, though no one knew I was sitting there. The director continued. "This individual has demonstrated a repetitive pattern of coercive control, emotional intimidation, and physical aggression which escalated into a documented incident resulting in injury. Immediate intervention was required by federal authorities." A woman in the front row gasped. Someone else muttered unbelievable under their breath. Reeves leaned forward, clasping his hands, but he did not look at me. He looked ahead as if watching something that needed to be witnessed without interruption. The director laid out the rest calmly, clinically, the way truth must be delivered when someone has spent years hiding behind a wall of intimidation. Based on collaborative reports from ER medical staff, the Criminal Investigation Division, and military police, the subject has been assessed as a continuing risk to the affected service member. The MPO prohibits all contact or proximity. Violations will be prosecuted at the federal level. The whispers grew sharper. Peyton was a small enough town that people knew families at least in passing. Some may have known my parents as quiet, polite church-going. Some may have known only the version of my father that he wanted seen the hard-working man who waved at neighbors, mowed his lawn on Saturdays, joked loudly at barbecues. But no one except my mother and me knew the version who shoved his daughter into furniture if she disagreed with him or demanded loyalty at the cost of personal freedom. Until now. The director stepped back, allowing space for questions. A man in a flannel shirt raised his hand. "How long has this been going on?" She answered with careful neutrality. "Evidence indicates the pattern spans many years, though recent escalation required immediate intervention." A heavy silence settled over the room. I knew exactly what people were thinking. How did no one see? How could a father treat his own daughter this way? Why didn't she speak up sooner? Those questions float around every domestic case, but only those who lived it understand how silence becomes survival. Another resident asked whether the subject could still attend community events. Reeves stiffened. "He cannot," the director replied firmly. "The MPO restricts him from approaching any installation facility or event where the service member might reasonably be present." The next question came from a woman in her 70s, her voice soft but resolute. "Is the service member safe now?" Reeves answered before the director could. "She is. And she is stronger than people realize." Something warm flickered in my chest. "Respect, maybe gratitude, definitely." Then the director announced the final part of the report. "For transparency, the subject's name will appear in the Public Safety Bulletin distributed across Colorado Springs and El Paso County." The reaction in the room was immediate. Murmurs surged like a wave. Public bulletin meant neighbors, coworkers, fellow church members, acquaintances. Even strangers who read community updates would know exactly who he was and what he had done. My father always prized reputation above everything. Respect was his currency. He believed people admired him, feared him, looked up to him. But now his name would be printed in black ink under a heading reserved for those who posed danger to others. I felt a tremor of justice climb up my spine. Not revenge, just truth illuminated. After the meeting ended, people clustered together whispering about the Lockwood case. I heard pieces of conversations as they passed me. Frank always thought he was better than everyone. I knew something was off about that man. Poor woman. I hope she's all right. Reeves stood beside me, hands in his pockets. Posture relaxed, but eyes alert, watching the reactions ripple through the community. "This is what accountability looks like," he said low enough for only me to hear. "It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is public. It is undeniable, and it is earned." We walked out into the bright Colorado sunlight where the air felt cleaner, sharper, somehow newer. For the first time, I noticed that my hands were not shaking. My breath was steady. My shoulders were not pulled tight. Later that afternoon, my mother called. I did not answer, but I listened to the voicemail. Her voice trembled. "Avery, everybody knows. Your father is furious. He says you humiliated him in front of the entire county. Please, call me." I stared at the phone, then set it down. Her fear was still chained to him. Mine was not. News of the bulletin spread quickly through Peyton. Neighbors who once waved politely now turned away from my father. His old friends stopped returning his calls. The men he used to impress with his booming voice and false charm avoided him in grocery stores. Reputation had been his armor for decades, but public truth stripped it away piece by piece until all that remained was a man exposed, a man known, a man accountable. And I, for the first time in my life, felt the weight of his image lift off my shoulders like a stone finally put down. Public justice had done something private suffering never could. It made the world see him clearly, and it allowed me to breathe freely. The consequences for my father did not arrive in a single catastrophic blow. They unfolded the way winter settles over the plains outside Peyton, slow, quiet, and unstoppable, until everything familiar is buried beneath something colder and truer. 3 days after the public safety bulletin was released, I received an email forwarded from a former co-worker of my father's at the electrical contracting firm he had worked at for almost 15 years. The subject line was short. "Thought you should know." The body contained nothing but a photo of an official termination notice with his name printed in rigid black font. Employment terminated effective immediately following violation of organizational conduct standards and risk to community safety. They did not mention the MPO or the CID report, but they did not need to. His name in the public bulletin had been enough. His boss had always valued community reputation more than skill, and my father's carefully curated image had collapsed in a matter of days. According to the email, he had stormed out of the office, cursing everyone in sight, insisting it was a misunderstanding, pretending he still held power in a place where everyone now saw through him. His job had been his pride, the proof that he was the backbone of the family, the authority, the provider, the man whose word could not be questioned. Without it, the foundation he had built his identity on cracked straight down the middle. That same evening, my mother called again. I let it go to voicemail because I already knew what the tone would be. Soft, shaking, guilt-soaked. When I finally listened, her voice came through in a fragile whisper. "Avery, your father came home with a box of his things. He would not speak to me. He is drinking. He blames you." She drew in a shaky breath. "I do not know what to do." I paused the message halfway through my chest, tightening with something complicated, not sympathy exactly, and not satisfaction either. Just clarity. He was crumbling because the world no longer aligned with the narrative he forced on us. When someone's power comes entirely from intimidation, losing control is the one consequence they cannot survive gracefully. The next morning, while I was getting ready for PT, my phone buzzed again. It was a text this time. From my mother. "Please meet me. Just me. No him. Noon at the diner off Highway 24. I hesitated, but Reeves reminded me that transparency mattered and that meeting her in public was safe. So at noon, I walked into the diner and found her already seated in a corner booth, hands clasped around a mug of coffee she had not touched. She looked older than I remembered, as if the years she spent trying to appease my father had finally settled onto her face now that she was no longer holding them up. When she saw me, her eyes filled instantly. "Avery," she whispered. I sat across from her waiting, but she took her time gathering courage she had never been allowed to use. Finally, she swallowed hard. "I am sorry." The words were thin, trembling, scarcely strong enough to hold the weight behind them. "I am so sorry for everything. For not protecting you. For letting him control everything. For not leaving when I should have." I watched her fingers twist together the way mine had as a child when I braced for his anger. She continued, "When you were 10, he grabbed you so hard I thought he broke your arm. I wanted to take you to the hospital. I wanted to call the police. But he told me if I said a word, he would leave and I would have nothing." She lifted her gaze to mine. "I chose fear over you. I should never have done that." I waited, letting her words settle, letting her truth take up space for the first time in my life. She reached across the table tentatively as if asking permission. "Avery, can you forgive me?" I held her gaze steady. "Mom, it is not that simple." She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. "I know. I just hoped." 20 years of silence pressed against the inside of my ribs. 20 years of bruises, lies, excuses. 20 years of being told to say I fell. I took a slow breath, then spoke with a calmness I had earned. "You had 20 years to protect me." The words were not cruel. They were not loud. They were simply true. She recoiled slightly as if the truth itself stung worse than any shout could. Her chin trembled. I understand." She withdrew her hand, folding it tightly in her lap. The reality of those words filled the space between us. She broke the silence after a long moment. "Your father is losing everything. His friends are avoiding him. The church board asked him to step down. Even his brother will not return his calls. He says he is being punished unfairly. He says you ruined his life." A hollow laugh escaped me. "I did not ruin his life. He built a life on hurting people. It was always going to collapse." She nodded slowly, absorbing that truth. Her voice softened to a fragile whisper. "What do I do now?" For the first time, I felt a shift in myself. I did not feel responsible for fixing her fear or rescuing her from his shadow. That was a burden she had allowed him to place on me for decades. I leaned back slightly, creating a boundary she could see. "That is for you to decide. Not me, not him." She looked down, unable to meet my eyes anymore. After we finished our coffee, she stood up shakily, thanked me for coming, and walked out alone into the cold Colorado sunlight. I watched her go without following her, without offering comfort, without promising anything. Boundaries are not cruel, they are necessary. When I returned to the base, Reeves was waiting outside the admin building, leaning against a railing. "How did it go?" he asked. I exhaled. Hard. True. Final. He nodded as if that was exactly the answer he expected. "Consequences are not just punishment," he said. "They are clarity." Over the next week, word spread further through Peyton and Colorado Springs. People who once praised my father now avoided him. The contractor community dropped him from project circles. Stores he used to frequent quietly asked him not to return. And for the first time in my life, every consequence he faced was his, and only his. Not mine, not my mother's, not covered up, not softened, just earned. Every single one. The audacity returned on a gray Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where clouds sit low over the mountains and the air feels dense enough to press on your skin. I was walking back from a briefing with Reeves when my phone vibrated with an urgent alert from gate security. Civilian male at Gate 3 demanding contact with Captain Avery Lockwood. Non-compliant, growing agitated. My stomach tightened, but not with fear this time, with recognition. There was only one man reckless enough to show up at a military installation and demand to see an officer protected under a federal order. Reeves read the message over my shoulder and exhaled sharply. He is really doing this. The absurdity in his voice almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I followed him to the observation point overlooking Gate 3, where we could see without being seen. The view opened onto the visitor control center, structured concrete wide asphalt, and the reinforced barricades that separated the public from the installation. And there he was, my father, Frank Lockwood, standing at the front of the line in a wrinkled jacket and a face red with righteous fury, pounding his fist on the metal railing as if anger alone could override federal jurisdiction. 2 MPs were stationed between him and the security checkpoint hands resting near their holsters, not threatening, just official. My father's voice carried even from a distance, thick, sharp, unrestrained. I want to speak to my daughter. You tell her to get out here right now. One MP lifted a hand in a calming gesture. Sir, you are in violation of a military protective order. You need to leave the area immediately. My father barked a humorless laugh. An MPO! You people think a piece of paper tells me I cannot see my own daughter. She is ruining our family, and I will not stand for it. Reeves's jaw tightened. He is digging himself a deeper hole with every word. And he was, because MPO violations are not civil misunderstandings. They are federal offenses, especially when the protected party is active duty. Another MP stepped forward firmly. Sir, you are approaching restricted property, and you have been advised to leave. You need to comply. Frank jabbed a finger at the gatehouse. She belongs to this family, not to you, not to this base, not to the Army. You tell her she will regret this. The words were the same tone he used when I was 10, when I was 18, when I was trying to leave for basic training. Words meant to intimidate, to shrink, to trap, but they carried no power now. Not here. Reeves glanced at me. Do you want to make contact? The old Avery, the one trained through survival, would have felt obligated, would have gone down there, tried to de-escalate, tried to placate the storm. The woman I had become shook her head slowly. No, this is not my confrontation. It is his violation. My silence is the boundary. My absence is the answer. Reeves nodded approvingly. That is what I hoped you would say. Down below, my father shouted again, voice cracking under its own weight. Avery, you are ruining your family. Everything we built. Everything I worked for. The irony nearly stole my breath. He had spent decades insisting that family meant loyalty to him, obedience to him, silence for him. Now that the world finally saw him for who he was, he clung to family as a shield he had never actually offered. One of the MPs lifted his radio, speaking into it calmly. Command, this is Gate 3. We have an MPO violation in progress. Subject is refusing to vacate, requesting guidance. The response crackled through the speaker. Gate 3, maintain position. Civilian law enforcement en route for removal. Do not allow subject access. My father heard it too. His face twisted into something desperate, almost feral. You called the police on me. I am her father. I am trying to fix this. He spread his arms wide as if appealing to an invisible audience. I am the victim here. The MP remained stoic. Sir, step back from the barricade. Failure to comply may result in detainment. That word touched a nerve. My father flinched, then shouted louder. She did this to me. She turned you against me. She thinks that uniform makes her better than her own blood. For a long moment, he stood there panting, glaring at the base, the buildings, the soldiers, as if the entire installation was conspiring to punish him. But the truth was simpler. He had crossed a line he could not uncross. Reeves placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. You are doing the right thing standing back. Let the system protect you. Let his choices catch up to him. I kept my eyes on my father, but I did not move, did not speak, did not break. Silence can be sharper than any argument. Eventually, the patrol car arrived, pulling up behind him with lights flashing, but no siren. 2 deputies stepped out and approached calmly, hands positioned for protocol. Mr. Lockwood, you were notified of the MPO issued against you. You are not permitted to contact or attempt to contact Captain Lockwood. You must leave the premises immediately. He tried to argue, tried to reach for indignation, but his voice cracked. They escorted him away, his protests fading into the distance as the MPs resumed their positions. Reeves exhaled something between relief and finality. That was the last card he had, and he played it poorly. I watched the patrol car disappear down the access road. No adrenaline, no fear, just a steady quiet inside me. Reeves turned to me. You did not confront him. You did not engage. That is cold justice, Avery, and you earned it. I nodded, still watching the empty gate. Let him shout at a gate that will never open for him again. Let him feel the distance he created. Let him understand silence is a sentence too. 2 weeks after the incident at Gate 3, I found myself driving toward the one place I had avoided for most of my life. Not the house in Peyton, not the stretch of highway where memories pressed too close, but the ER at Memorial Hospital North. The place where I had once walked in bruised and shaking, whispering lies to protect the man who caused the injuries. The winter sun hung low over Colorado Springs, casting long bands of gold across the pavement as I parked and stepped out of the car. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but for once I did not flinch at the sting. Pain without fear feels different. Cleaner. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, releasing the familiar mix of antiseptic and warm air from inside. My boots clicked steadily on the polished floor. No hesitation. No shrinking. A nurse passed me, glanced at my uniform, and nodded respectfully. I remembered standing here not long ago as a patient trying to fold myself smaller while a doctor gently asked questions I was too afraid to answer. I remembered gripping the edge of the exam table, rehearsing the script I had been trained to use since adolescence. I fell. I tripped. It was an accident. I remembered my father's voice echoing inside my skull, even when he wasn't in the room. Now the echoes were gone, replaced by a steadiness in my chest that felt almost unfamiliar. Captain Reeves walked beside me, silent but present, hands in his pockets, taking in the space with the protective awareness he never turned off. He let me lead. I stopped at the doorway of the same exam room where the ER physician had first suspected something was wrong. The room was empty now, a new set of crisp sheets on the bed monitors quiet the steel tray gleaming under the overhead light. I stepped inside, letting the door fall closed behind us. The silence felt symbolic, as if the room itself were waiting for me to rewrite the memory I had left here. I traced the edge of the exam table with my fingertips, remembering how I sat hunched over trying to hide the bruises on my ribs, how the doctor had tilted her head gently and said, "Avery, these injuries do not match a fall." I remembered how my breath caught, how I panicked, how the truth clawed at my throat, but the lie slipped out first. I am fine. I just need to go home. Home! I almost laughed at the word now. Home had been a battleground disguised as a living room. Home had been a place where silence was required and obedience demanded. I stood straighter, my shoulders loosening as I inhaled slowly. This room was where denial had lived its last hour before truth finally pushed its way forward. Reeves watched me quietly, giving me space. When I finally turned toward him, his expression softened in that rare way it did when he understood something without being told. "This is where you lied for the last time, isn't it?" he said gently. I nodded. This is where I realized the lie was killing me more than the truth ever could. He stepped closer, his voice low. "I know this is not easy. Closure never is." I let out a breath I had been holding since the day of the assault. But it is necessary. I walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. Patients came and went. Families hurried and nurses wheeled equipment past the entrance in seamless rhythms of crisis and care. Life went on in its steady loops. Mine was finally joining it. Reeves stood beside me, leaning lightly against the windowsill. His presence felt grounding. Not heavy, not intrusive, just steady. "Avery," he said quietly. "After everything, what do you want to do now?" I turned to him slowly, letting the question settle. Not what should I do? Not what am I allowed to do? What do I want? For a woman whose life had been curated by someone else's control for decades, the question was revolutionary. I felt the answer rise through me as naturally as breath. Live without fear. The words came out soft but unwavering. Reeves nodded as if sealing a truth that had waited years to be spoken aloud. then let that be your mission from here on out, not survival. Freedom, the kind built every day in choices small and large. I let the moment anchor itself. Standing tall in the room where I once folded into myself, I felt a quiet victory settle deep in my bones. Not the loud, triumphant kind, the real kind. The kind that comes from choosing yourself even when history tells you not to. When we left the exam room, I paused at the threshold, taking one last look at the space that had once held my fear. Now it held nothing of me. I had taken myself back. As we stepped into the hallway, the overhead lights flickered softly reflected across polished floors. Reeves fell into stride beside me, matching my pace without leading or following. Just walking with me. And for the first time in my life, my steps felt entirely my own. Outside, the cold air rushed around us, crisp and alive, as if welcoming a new version of me. I squared my shoulders, breathed in the sharp winter wind, and walked toward a future no longer defined by fear, but by freedom, clarity, and the quiet strength of someone who finally chose herself. If you're still here with me, then you know this was never just a story about bruises or investigations or military protocols. It was a story about breaking a cycle that should have been broken decades ago. A story about choosing truth over fear, even when fear is the thing you were raised to obey. Walking out of that ER, stepping through the gates of Fort Carson, watching the people who once silenced me face consequences they never thought would touch them each moment, felt like reclaiming a part of myself I didn't realize had been missing. And if any part of my journey echoed something in your life, if you have ever been told to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to protect someone who never protected you, then hear me when I say this. You deserve safety. You deserve peace. You deserve a life where your voice is not just allowed but respected. I chose to live without fear. You deserve that same choice. So let me ask you something and answer only if you feel ready. Have you ever felt controlled, dismissed, or diminished by the very people who were supposed to care for you? Has someone ever told you that you didn't matter only for you to discover later how strong you truly were? If this story reached you, if it stirred something inside you or reminded you of your own strength, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city, your state, your corner of the world. I want to know how far this message of courage and justice travels. Your voice matters here, even if it was silenced somewhere else. And if you're someone who broke free, or is trying to break free, I'm proud of you. Truly. If this story meant something to you, like the video, share it with someone who might need it and subscribe for more stories of quiet strength, loud justice, and the people who reclaim their lives, one truth at a time.